Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and tonight I am here just to help you relax, to drift off to sleep by the sound of the waves, like the whispers of old souls. I know you have come to this video not just to hear the story, but also to find a deep, peaceful sleep. But before we begin, please gently like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to tell you strange stories under the dim moonlight. Where are you from? And what time is it where you live? Just relax. Let your body relax. Put all your worries down by your pillow. Let me take you into a world of mysteries where the wind and the waves mingle, and unsolved mysteries are waiting to be told. Are you ready? Witness to my own funeral. The darkness came first, then awareness. Not the gentle awakening from sleep, but a violent snap into consciousness, like a circuit suddenly completing. I existed, suspended in perfect blackness, my mind racing while my body lay still as carved stone. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I couldn't move. Yet I wasn't suffocating. Instead, I existed in a state of suspended animation, my consciousness trapped in an immobile shell. Voices filtered through the darkness, muffled at first, then gradually clearer. A somber baritone resonated above me. Russell Mercer was a man of passion and conviction. In his 47 years, he touched many lives with his generosity and spirit. My name, my age, my eulogy. Panic surged through my mind like an electrical storm, but my pulse remained undetectable. I was at my own funeral. The realization crystallized with horrifying clarity. I was presumed dead, yet fully, agonizingly aware. The air around me was heavy with the mingled scents of lilies and formaldehyde. The polished wood of what I now understood to be my coffin felt cold against my back, even through the suit I'd been dressed in. My final suit, chosen without my consent. He leaves behind his loving wife, Margaret, and his daughter, Emily, both of whom he cherished above all else. Margaret. Her face appeared in my mind, soft brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, chestnut hair that caught the light, slender fingers that had touched my face just days ago. Or had it been longer? Time had become fluid, unreliable. I strained against my paralysis, willing just one finger to twitch, one eyelid to flutter. Nothing. My body remained a prison of flesh, unresponsive to my desperate commands. As the prayer ended, footsteps approached. The coffin creaked slightly as someone leaned over it. A drop of moisture, a tear, fell onto my cheek and slid down to my ear. I couldn't even flinch at the sensation. "Oh, Russell." Margaret's voice choked with emotion. "I'll miss you so much." Her words should have comforted me. Instead, They sent a chill through my paralyzed form. Something in her tone, some subtle note beneath the grief, registered as wrong, like an instrument slightly out of tune, not enough for most to notice, but jarring to those who knew the true sound. Memory flickered like a faltering flame. The night before, what I thought was my death. Margaret bringing me a glass of whiskey. The unusual bitter aftertaste. The creeping numbness that had started in my fingertips and spread inward. My heartbeat slowing. Her face watching. Not with horror or concern, but with patience. The tranquil passage process is revolutionary, a professional voice explained above me. Dr. Howard, I presumed, the mortician from Serenity Gardens Memorial. The synthetic preservation compound allows natural death processes to conclude while preventing decomposition. The funeral home's specialization in this advanced method now seemed like cruel irony. I was trapped in the midpoint between mortality and preservation, held in stasis by chemicals that maintained my appearance, while my consciousness remained horrifyingly intact. And you're certain he's gone? Emily's voice, my daughter, 24 years old, analytical like me, suspicious of convenient truths. Even in my state, pride flickered within me at her questioning tone. Standard protocol requires a 24-hour waiting period before final sealing, Dr. Howard continued. It's mostly tradition, of course. We'll complete the preservation process tomorrow morning, 24 hours. A window of opportunity. That's thoughtful, Margaret remarked, her voice tight. Though I can't imagine why we'd need to wait. The scent of her perfume, vanilla and amber, drifted over me as she leaned closer to the coffin. I felt her fingers brush against mine, a feather-light touch that arranged my hands more perfectly over my chest. The law requires it, Dr. Howard replied, his tone professionally neutral. State regulations for the tranquil passage method are quite specific. I heard Margaret's slight intake of breath, so subtle that only someone who had shared a bed with her for 15 years would recognize it as frustration. The paralysis from the tetrodotoxin. I was certain now that's what she had used. Left me unable even to regulate my awareness. I couldn't sleep, couldn't drift into unconsciousness to escape this nightmare. I could only think, remember, and realize with growing horror what had happened. A door opened. The sound of high heels clicking against the floor grew louder, then stopped beside my coffin. Russell. Margaret's voice, no longer performatively grief-stricken. I need to make sure you understand why this is happening. Her fingertips traced the edge of the coffin, inches from my face. You never truly saw me. did you? Always focused on your own needs, your own desires. 15 years in your shadow, adjusting myself to fit your expectations. Her voice remained quiet, controlled. Did you know I started painting again last year? No, you didn't notice the studio I set up in the garage. Just like you didn't notice when I stopped loving you 3 years ago. Her words sliced through me more effectively than any scalpel. I hadn't noticed. I could have just left, she continued, her voice thoughtful. Divorce is so common, isn't it? But then I'd get half of everything at best. This way. She paused, and I could almost see her smile. This way, I get it all. The house, the investments, the insurance, a fresh start. The funny thing is, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, no one will ever suspect. Your high blood pressure, your family history of heart problems, everyone saw this coming eventually. Just not quite so soon. 24 hours, she murmured. Then it will be over. I'm sorry it has to be this way, Russell. But I've waited long enough for my life to begin. Time distorted in the coffin. Only the subtle changes in ambient sound gave me any sense of time's passage. The paralysis was absolute. Yet paradoxically, I felt everything. The slight pressure of the coffin's padded interior, the unnatural stiffness of my starched collar. Most of all, I felt the crushing weight of Margaret's betrayal pressing against my chest more heavily than any physical constraint. The sound of the funeral home's front door opening interrupted my thoughts. Multiple footsteps approached my room. I just want to see him one more time. Emily's voice, tight with emotion. Before tomorrow. Of course, Miss Mercer. Take all the time you need. Dr. Howard's professional compassion. Dad. Emily's voice was closer now, directly above me. If only I could move. If only I could signal to her. My daughter, the one person who might question, who might look closely enough to see the truth. He doesn't look right, she said suddenly. I'm sorry? Dr. Howard's voice, confused. Something's off. His color. It's not like when someone's passed. Emily's voice grew firmer. And look at his eyes. The eyelids naturally settle in a slightly open position sometimes, Dr. Howard explained. We generally close them fully before the final preservation. No, it's not that. I swear they moved. My consciousness surged at her words. Yes, Emily. Look closer, Miss Mercer. Dr. Howard's voice was gentle but firm. I understand this is incredibly difficult. Many people experience these moments, seeing what they wish to see. I'm not imagining it, Emily insisted. Something's wrong. Dad had this thing about being buried alive. It was like a phobia for him. He made me promise I'd always check, always be sure. She was right. After reading Poe as a teenager, I'd developed an irrational fear of premature burial. The bitter irony of my current situation wasn't lost on me. "I want another doctor to look at him." Emily's voice cracked slightly. "Please, just to be sure." "That would be unusual," Dr. Howard said carefully, "but not impossible. However, we would need next of kin approval. That would be your mother." "Then call her," Emily said. "Call her right now." The sound of a phone being dialed. Rings echoed through the quiet room. "Margaret Mercer." My wife's voice, slightly surprised. After brief explanations, Margaret's voice acquired a careful neutrality. "Emily," she finally said, softly chiding. "You're traumatized. We all are. But this isn't healthy." "Mom, please." "Dr. Howard," Margaret interrupted, "is there any medical reason to believe my husband isn't deceased?" "No, Mrs. Mercer. All standard protocols were followed." "Then I think we need to accept reality and allow the grieving process to proceed naturally." The call ended. I felt a surge of desperate hope as Dr. Howard moved closer to the coffin. "I'll perform a standard examination," he explained to Emily. I felt his cool, gloved fingers press against my neck, searching for a pulse that the tetrodotoxin had rendered imperceptible. He lifted one of my eyelids fully. The first change in my visual field since awakening in this nightmare. This was my chance. If any part of me could move, any minute twitch or dilation, now was the moment. "Pupillary response is absent," Dr. Howard noted clinically. "No sign of cardiovascular activity." "No!" I screamed within the prison of my mind. "I'm here! I'm alive!" "Wait!" Emily's voice was sharp. "Do that again. Check his eyes again." Dr. Howard obliged, lifting my eyelid once more. "I swear I saw something," Emily insisted. "A tiny movement. There are certain substances that can create a death-like state," he said carefully. "Extremely rare cases, but in my 40 years of practice, I've read about them." "What are you saying?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "Given your concerns and certain subtle anomalies I'm observing, I believe we should delay the final preservation process until we can conduct more thorough tests, just to be absolutely certain." In the stillness of my paralysis, a spark of hope flared to life. I was alone with Dr. Howard. After Emily left to make arrangements for additional tests, he had remained in the viewing room. "Mr. Mercer," he finally said, his voice low and measured, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that I suspect what might have happened to you. In my younger years, I worked briefly in Haiti," he continued. "I witnessed cases there, substances that could induce states virtually indistinguishable from death. Tetrodotoxin is one such agent." "Yes," my mind screamed. "That's it." The door opened. The familiar sound of Margaret's heels approached. "Dr. Howard," she said, her voice carefully modulated, "I'd like a word." Their footsteps receded, leaving me alone once more. Minutes stretched endlessly until the door opened again. "I appreciate your understanding, Dr. Howard." Margaret's voice had regained its composure. Something in his tone had changed. The certainty, the suspicion from earlier, had been replaced by a strange formality. Dr. Howard's footsteps retreated, and the door closed, leaving me alone with my would-be murderer. "Well," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that was inconvenient. Your dutiful daughter nearly complicated things," she continued. "But fortunately, Dr. Howard is a practical man. When faced with the choice between pursuing an unlikely theory or accepting a generous donation to the funeral home's renovation fund, he made the sensible decision. Cold horror washed over me. She had bought his silence, his complicity. "The tests won't happen," she explained calmly. "Instead, they'll complete the preservation process tonight. A small adjustment to the schedule, that's all." Her perfume, once comforting, now sickening, enveloped me as she leaned closer. "This isn't just about money. This is about freedom. From your expectations. From your subtle control. The truth is, I've besaid for years in our marriage," she said. "Now it's just making official what's been true all along. One of us needed to go. And you always said you'd die for me. Now you get to keep that promise." Time passed. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. The door opened again, and multiple sets of footsteps entered. "We'll begin the final preservation now," Dr. Howard's voice announced. "Mrs. Mercer has signed all the necessary authorizations." I felt hands positioning equipment near the coffin, heard the soft hiss of pressurized systems being prepared. "Begin the process," Dr. Howard instructed. I heard a mechanical sound, then the subtle hiss of gas being released into the coffin. The door burst open with a crash. "Stop!" Emily's voice, breathless and commanding. "Stop right now. Miss Mercer, your mother has..." "I don't care what she authorized," Emily interrupted fiercely. "I have a court order. This is highly unusual," Dr. Howard said, his voice tight. "Judge Harriman is a family friend," Emily explained, "and he takes potential medical malpractice very seriously. This emergency order requires independent verification before any further procedures. And I've brought someone who can help with that," Emily continued. "Dr. Langhorne from County General. She specializes in toxicology." "Dr. Howard," a new female voice greeted coolly. "I understand there's some question about this death certificate. I'd like to perform some tests immediately." I felt the preservation gas being shut off. Hands moved around me, unfastening something near the coffin's edge. "I'm drawing blood for immediate analysis," Dr. Langhorne explained, "and I'm administering a counteragent that will neutralize certain paralytic toxins if present." Something cold entered my veins. The sensation, the first active feeling beyond passive awareness since this nightmare began. was shockingly intense. Hands moved over me, clinical and thorough. Fingers pressed against my neck, lifted my eyelids, checked my reflexes. "Interesting," Dr. Langhorne murmured. "Very interesting." And then, a miracle. The slightest twitch in my index finger, imperceptible to anyone not watching for it, but to me, it was an earthquake, a revolution, a resurrection. "There!" Emily's voice, triumphant. "His finger moved. I saw it." "Indeed," Dr. Langhorne confirmed, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately. This man is not dead. He's been poisoned with a neurotoxin that mimics death." The room erupted into activity. I felt my body being lifted, transferred, moved with urgent care. "Someone should inform Mrs. Mercer," Dr. Howard suggested, his voice strained. "Oh, don't worry about that," Emily said, her voice carrying a hardness I'd never heard before. "The police are already speaking with her. They were very interested in the contents of her evening tea." "Her tea?" Dr. Langhorne asked. "Yes," Emily replied, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "The one containing the same substance that nearly killed my father. The one I've been replacing with harmless herb tea for the past week, ever since I found her research on tetrodotoxin on her laptop." As they wheeled me toward the ambulance, I felt the paralysis receding further. A finger twitch became a hand flexing. An eyelid flickered. My lungs expanded slightly more with each breath. I was coming back from the dead. And Margaret was going to a cell. Justice, like life itself, sometimes hangs by the thinnest of threads. But when that thread holds, resurrection is possible. Venus, buried. The girl in the graveyard is your best friend, so you take her home. The night is a bruise between you, a blotch of rogue in the passenger window, the color of fruit left out to fester. The body pries at her seatbelt, a finger, then two. The radio echoes static. The body shuffles in her seat. You study the face, the similar slice of jaw, the nose humped from where a baseball had hit her at 12, just slightly off-center. The skin like a rain-licked plastic bag, the stink of musk and sulfur. You want to look away, but you cannot. She's so beautiful, even like this. Your headlights rake warbled slits through the dirt road, a yellow like jaundice. Your hands are stiff from the cold, your lips cracked. The girl beside you is dead, and you are bringing her home. 4 days ago, you'd stepped into a hardware store and emerged with a shovel sturdy enough to lift a life on. 4 days you'd spent digging dirt in your own backyard yard until loam muddied under your fingernails and erratic holes split garden beds like the mouths of greedy beasts. Until you could sift through soil with your eyes closed, with a hand bound. 4 nights you had laid in your bed, staring at the pockmarked ceiling, wondering what it felt like to burn alive. Now, the shovel beats dull against the skin of your trunk, your hands gripping the steering wheel like a throat you're trying to silence. The body turns, dawn bleaching the salmon gray of her skin. The left eye slips from its socket, and she pushes it back in with the heel of her hand. She smiles, head lolling like a marionette's. "Sorry, baby." Her voice comes out strained. "I wasn't expecting company. I'm sure you understand." In a sickle of citrus moonlight, Adeline Marcus smiles up at you with shell-pale gums. Adeline Marcus died on the 31st of October and was buried a week later, the date on her gravestone a month shy of her 18th birthday. In the court, the boys would claim it was an accident, that they didn't know she was inside. For better or worse, you believe them. The fingers striking out matchboxes, the beer cans constellating the sidewalk. A prank gone too far, the wrong place, the wrong time. It doesn't have to be on purpose. She didn't have to be home. The coroner ruled it suffocation. But all you can imagine is flame like a stiff palm, striking over and over. Adeline had crawled from the mouth of the home on her hands and knees. She was dead by the time she reached the pavement, her Sunday dress singed up to her knees, the dress you knew well enough. Either way, the boys were left with 25 to life, and the Marcas were left with a dead daughter, a ring of ash like chalk on the pavement. You were left with a misplaced guilt, like hunger, a guilt like an Ouroboros, choking on the tail, swallowing the head, eating yourself alive and being unable to stop, even as it consumes you. Because this wasn't the sort of thing that happened to good people. You watch water curl down your shower drain, carrying with it mortuary makeup, kaleidoscopic insects, and jasmine bubbles. Strings of dirt stretched out like sinew. The body's head rests on her knees, vertebrae needling through her back like a line of molars. The electric lights wash her green, dark veins rooted under brittle skin. She turns her face to the shower head and picks at the powdery sediment under her fingernails. The shower floor is a mess of grit. And you think of a child scooping up the sand. You turn the heat up until it scalds and scrub mildew from the base of the shower door. You think, if you can only get everything clean, everything will be all right. She turns her head and looks at you through eyes obscured by glass paneling. She says, "It's not as bad as all that. I don't even think I felt a thing." But she says it through lips the color of spoiled plums, so the sentiment doesn't ring true. You lift threadbare towels from the bottoms of your linen closet. You walk 3 times around your block and return to a corpse sat on your sofa like she has nowhere better to be. There are ants in your sugar bowl. You try to remove them, lift their crystal-knotted bodies on the prong of a fork, but they slip between the gaps, and you are left with a mess bigger than when you started. Tea-brown sludge bleeding from thoraxes and the stink of vinegar. There's a dead girl on your sofa, but let's focus on the ants in your sugar bowl. The way they thread through cysts of white like veins on a leaf, like the capillaries that run through the skin of your face. You make tea anyway. You add too much milk and sit cross-legged in front of the body. She stares at you. You stare back. The two of you drink, and ribbons of watery milk pour clean out her trachea, the gaping hole in her chest. But she doesn't stop drinking until you do. "You're not looking at me," she says. "Not really." "Yes, I am." You twist your hands in the shag carpet. "Aren't I now?" "No," she says. "You're not." You leave your teacup on the floor, saucer an iris of yellow, and go upstairs. You take 2 cigarettes from the carton squashed on your father's desk, and then think better of it. Press down with your heel until tobacco dissipates into the tawny carpet. You change your bed sheets twice, eggshell white. No, gray with peonies. You make a second cup of tea. When you get back to the room, the body is still there. You are looking at her. You are not looking at her. "Do I disgust you?" she says. "No." She shakes her head, dark hair plastered to her shoulders like reeds. "No more than I always did. You need to sleep." You say, "Baby." She tilts her head to one side. "Sleeping is all I've ever done." The last time you saw Adeline Marcus alive was in the back of a stranger's car, parked on a stranger's street, with the taste of a stranger's tequila fresh between your lips. You were never too built for parties, so the outcome was a pair of girls who looked like they were playing dress-up. Blousy dresses with sleeves like a nun's, thrift store necklaces noosing your necks, shoplifted lipstick, which she hid beneath her mattress, more wax than pigment. But in the citrus peel of street lights, in the low trill of distant music, the two of you looked beautiful. She had her legs curled under her and was sitting sideways in the back seat, her hand resting on your knee and the other palmed against the window, a song on her lips that you couldn't quite place. You were too close, but it was night, and everyone was inside and drunk. And sometimes we all need to feel closer than we should be, to lose ourselves a little. The song melted on her lips, swallowed into the limp press of salvia and booze, and you said something like, "I think I should go home now," and she said something like, "Have another drink." And so you did. You let her pour the liquor into the flimsy mouths of red plastic cups and watched her swallow. She said, "You're so pretty." And you said, "I think you should stop." And she said, "Just let me say that one thing." And you wanted to say, "Stop fucking looking at me like that." And you wanted to say, "I want to crawl inside you and make a life for myself in the city of your mind." And you wanted to say, "Let's just be quiet. Let's just not talk. Let's just not ruin a good thing by telling the truth." Instead, you pushed open the passenger door, stumbled out onto the skin of vein blue sidewalk. "I'm going home now." The body lays with her back to your bed, hands worming in the floral sheets, chestnut hair spilling across her throat, past the ballpoint pen-marred bedposts, over the gray skin of her forehead. You are thinking about the silken mouth of a coffin. You are thinking of how she looked when you pulled her from the rose mouth of heaven. The radiator hums. A lace curtain bellies your open window. She rolls over onto her side, slots her hands together like pieces of a decaying jigsaw puzzle. You still can't even look at me. Her mouth moves too slowly, words like chewing gum. "Why am I here, Bet? What's it for?" There are pink crescent moons on the bed of your palms from the bite of your nails. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a bone cracks. She pulls her knees to her chest, and a molar tumbles from between her keyhole lips. "You can only love me when I'm not here. You can only love me when there's nothing left to love." You press your cheek to the cool spread of linen beside her. You listen to the steady beat of your heart, the way you can feel it in your fingertips, entirely singular. "Don't tell anyone." You say, "Did you want it to die with me, Beta?" She shifts, and her hair falls against the nape of your neck. Were you glad it was silenced? "Don't tell anyone." You say again. She sighs, lays herself back down, so you're face to face. Crooked nose, eye pulling from its socket. The onset of gray-green decay wreathing her jaw. The smell of soil and rot and cicada-heavy nighttime. Who could I tell? She brushes your hand. "I'm not really here." And suddenly, you can imagine it is your fists splitting beer cans in two, like overripe fruit. It is your fingers on the matchbox, your fingers striking out. But you both know the house would still be on fire. And you both know you'd leave alone. You take her hand. You put your face in the crook of her neck and beg forgiveness from a ghost. Just another dead girl. Underwater. Trigger warning. Implications of death, violence, and sexual harassment. By the time the fisherman finds me, I will have been dead for 33 hours, 6 minutes, and 29 seconds. 18 hours since the police declared me missing. 15 hours since Zoe told my biology teacher that my tent was empty. that I hadn't returned from the party we'd snuck out to the night before. Careful, quiet, every twig a possible snitch. It was exhilarating, our hearts pounding, the smell of pine and seaweed thick in the air, and the moon a perfectly curved sickle. Zoe held my sweaty hand and didn't let go until we'd passed the tents and joined the others by the lake. The music on someone's phone was turned down just low enough for us to make out Billie Eilish's raspy voice. One of the guys offered us a beer, kept cool in the pitch-black, lurking water. I remember thinking I couldn't tell where the lake ended and the forest began. The first article, published by a local newspaper, reads, "Promising high school student missing after night swim in lake." Shortly after, the Water Rescue Service and Fire Brigade take over the search. Dogs comb the area, their noses trailing through the damp earth. A human chain forms, people moving slowly through the woods, eyes scanning for any sign of me. Even a helicopter hovers overhead, its whirring blades slicing through the heavy, charged air. The search drags on for hours, stretching into the twilight. Yet the woods remain silent. The police begin to ask questions. When was she last seen? What was she wearing? Had she been drinking? Did she seem out of character? Angry? Sad? Suicidal? No, no, and no. She was singing. She was dancing. She seemed happy. When the fisherman finds my body, miles away from where I was last seen, certainty sets in. The autopsy reveals a hematoma on my head and purple spots behind my ears. The coroners examine the water in my lungs and confirm that I wasn't dead before entering the water. I died by drowning. My classmates are questioned again. Zoe claims to have left early, while I stayed behind with her twin brother, Tom, who has been in love with me since middle school. Tom's behavior strikes the police as odd. He insists he barely spoke to me, despite people seeing us leave the party together for a few minutes. When my body is examined, traces of Tom's skin are found on my clothes, trapped between the fabric layers. Still, Tom sticks to his story, perhaps because the truth would embarrass him for some reason. Or maybe he's just afraid of the questions that would follow, and the scrutiny that might come with them. Tom is right, you know, in the broadest sense. We really only exchanged 3 or 4 sentences that night, but only because Tom's mouth was otherwise occupied with me. I had enjoyed every second of it, and looking back, I wish I'd given him a real chance. But I was too worried about what other people might think. So, as usual, I brushed him off, leaving him to walk away from the party, feeling hurt. Cassandra insists she heard Zoe and me arguing that night, just before Zoe headed back to the campsite. According to her, we were fighting over Tom. Of course she would say that. What else would two girls argue about, if not a boy? Cassandra even claims that Zoe pushed me, though Zoe denies it vehemently. She denies discussing Tom at all, insisting it was about something else, something that wouldn't come to light until much later, when our biology teacher became a suspect. But Cassandra holds firm to her version. The thing about Cassandra is that she's always been a shadow, the kind of girl whose name teachers forget after 2 weeks of spring break. Kelly, Cindy, Carrie. Something with a Z, though, right? So, when she finally gets the chance to talk to the police and be part of the investigation, she jumps at it. Unfortunately, Cassandra isn't much help to the investigators. She leaves the party at 2 a.m., just 40 minutes before I die, leaving me alone with a group of guys who've brought along some tranquilizers. Sitting next to them felt like being stuck in a fever dream where Jacques Derrida explains quantum physics at a frat party. At some point, I decided it was time to head back. One of the guys casually asked if I needed someone to walk with me, and I said yes. But no one moved. I glanced back, the campsite faintly visible through the cold, white light filtering through the pines. It was only a few meters away, just beyond the trees. I'd walked this path for days, never once feeling threatened by the shadows in the bushes. But tonight, that sinking feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. Still, I refused to be that girl, the one who got scared at every creak in the dark, the one who needed someone to hold her hand for a few steps. So I stood up and said I'd walk alone. Instead of sticking to the dark trail, though, I decided to take a small detour along the riverbank, a bit longer, a bit lighter, and hopefully a bit safer. One of the guys told me to text him when I made it to my tent, but when I didn't, no one even noticed. 16 days after my death, suspicion begins to shift toward our biology teacher. Devin, one of my classmates, reveals that he had felt ill that night and went looking for the teacher's tent, only to find it empty. Soon after, the teacher's behavior takes a strange turn. He starts making inconsistent statements that don't add up. One day, he calls Zoe into his office after class, where he insists that his earlier proposal to her before the trip had been nothing but a joke. She understood that, right? It was sarcasm, he says, claiming that what he really meant was that if she wanted to improve her grades, she should consider attending a tutoring service. And this is where Cassandra steps in for the final time. She confesses that she visited our biology teacher after the party and that they went to the boathouse, where, according to her, nothing bad happened. He was just there for me. The biology teacher is immediately suspended, but the case against him has nothing to do with mine, as Cassandra's alibi clears him. Meanwhile, the suspicions surrounding Zoe and Tom are too weak to pursue. my case remains unsolved. And eventually, people begin to accept the idea that it was just a tragic accident, that I must have hit my head when I jumped into the water. They agree that I seemed unhappy, not just that night, but in general, and that my relationship with my parents, who expected me to excel in everything, was strained. Perhaps the pressure had finally got to her. It's all unsatisfying, of course. Unsatisfying for the local magazine, whose updates eventually dry up. Unsatisfying for the police, left with yet another unsolved case on their desk. Unsatisfying for my parents, who, decades later, will say in an interview that not a day goes by that they don't think of their little girl. Maybe one day, a classmate will write a college essay about my case, reflecting on how it taught them that life can end in an instant. Maybe my story will end up on a true crime podcast. Or perhaps Netflix will stretch it into a tightly structured 8-episode miniseries where my body is discovered just 3 minutes in. Enough time for viewers to decide if they'll keep watching. Or maybe none of this happens, and I'll fade away like countless other women who are silenced every day simply for being born the wrong sex. It doesn't matter who profits from my story. It doesn't even matter if they eventually find the 2 men I crossed paths with on my way back to the campsite in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of this matters, because in the end, I'm just another dead girl underwater. Santa. The hitman? The hospice smells like antiseptic and failed dreams. A Christmas-themed air freshener dangles from the IV stand, swaying in time with my father's mechanical wheezing. It smells like cinnamon and regret. The fluorescent lights hum, drowning out the morphine's slow drip. Hi, I'm the man who never amounted to anything. The trophyless disappointment. If life is a race, I'm the guy who tripped in the first 10 feet and never got back up. 35 years old, still renting, and my most significant contribution to society is a viral video of me accidentally setting fire to a microwave burrito. That's me, proud owner of a pile of unwashed dishes and a credit score so low it could run for public office. I sit slouched in this corner, watching my dad suck on life like it's a particularly stubborn milkshake. He's enormous. Round face, round belly, round everything. A human snowman, melted into a hospice bed. The kind of guy who built his whole life on being likable. For 30 years, he played Santa Claus at the mall. Not just any Santa, mind you. He was the Santa. The one people drove 4 counties over to see. His face still pops up on Christmas cards across the Midwest. A local legend, a walking, jolly Norman Rockwell painting. And me? I'm the guy who gave him a $10 Amazon gift card for Christmas. You'd think that's why he's dying. the look he gave me when he opened it. He beckons me closer, his hand shaking like a rusty wind-up toy. "Come here, kiddo." "Yeah, sure," I say, dragging the chair closer. It screeches against the linoleum like its legs are fighting with the floor. "What is it this time?" Another story about how you single-handedly saved Christmas at the mall in '93. His laugh comes out like a wheeze caught in a blender. Then he stops, face turning deadly serious, eyes boring into mine. "I've got a confession, kiddo. Something big." I lean back. Here we go again. "Oh, great. Did you save Christmas again?" He laughs, shakes his head. His smile, faint but still there, cracks like old plaster. "No. Listen to me, kiddo. I killed people. I was a hitman." The words hit me like a sucker punch to the ribs. His eyes twinkle with something far from Christmas cheer. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Not because I believed him, but because some part of me wanted to. Like, even in death, Dad had to be bigger than life. Then the ridiculousness hit me, and I laughed. Hard. Too hard. "Jesus, Dad, did the morphine knock your last screw loose? You don't think a guy with fake snow in his eyebrows could carry out a clean kill? Do you?" Dad's grin spreads like butter on burnt toast, his cheeks wobbling like he's auditioning for Jell-O's next ad campaign. I stare. Words feel stuck somewhere between my brain and my tongue, like traffic on the I-5 during rush hour. I've got a list of things I never expected to hear from my father. "I love you. I'm proud of you. There's a secret trust fund hidden in the walls. But this takes the cake, and then assassinates the baker. You're messing with me," I finally manage. Is this one of those morphine fever dreams? Should I call the nurse? Blink once for yes. Dad coughs out a laugh, deep and phlegmy, shaking his head. No joke. I was good at it too. Seasonal work was the perfect cover. Everyone sees Santa as a big, harmless teddy bear. No one suspects Santa Claus of carrying a 9mm Glock. I blink. Hard. He's lost it. The man's gone off the deep end, dragged the Christmas tree, the reindeer, and the inflatable snowman with him. I had a code, he says, his voice dropping to a low rasp, like he's auditioning for The Godfather. Never moms, never kids, and no one who liked Christmas. I rub my temples. So you're telling me all those business trips to Reno weren't about fixing mall contracts? Nope. He pops the P like he's proud. They were about fixing people. Your old man was a regular Mr. Clean. And you expect me to believe this? He leans forward, a Herculean effort given his state. Remember the upstairs neighbor at our old place? The guy who played techno at 2 a.m.? I nod slowly. stomach sinking. You said he moved. I moved him. His grin widens. To a landfill. Permanently. You're not serious, I whisper, but my voice cracks. Oh God, he's serious. Go to my apartment and look for a box labeled Santa's Naughty List. Top shelf of my closet. See for yourself. I'm halfway to the door when the heart monitor gives up. The line going flat, like it's tired of pretending he had time left. Dad's apartment is a shrine to Christmas. Not the classy Pottery Barn kind of Christmas. This is the Walmart on clearance kind. Everywhere you look, there's a red and green assault on the senses. Tinsel dangles like garish cobwebs. A nutcracker army lines the windowsill, their paint chipped like they've been through a war. Fake snow dusts every surface, not sprinkled, but dumped, like he'd been trying to recreate a blizzard indoors. I kick a pile of it near the couch. It puffs up, glittering. The closet, though, that's where things get creepy. Rows of Santa suits hang in perfect order, sorted by decade. The 80s suits are polyester atrocities, faded red, like tomato soup, left in the sun. The newer ones are lush, rich velvets. There's even a Santa pimp cane leaning in the corner. Because, of course, there is. And the smell? That weird mothball meets candy cane funk. It clings to your clothes, gets in your hair. I'd need 3 showers and a priest to feel clean again. That's when I see it. A box on the top shelf, labeled in Sharpie, Santa's Naughty List. My stomach drops. No way that this is real. No way. The box creaks as I pull it down. Years of dust exploding in my face. Inside, the first thing I see is a pair of cracked glasses. Thick, Coke bottle lenses, scratched to hell, still smeared with something. A fingerprint, maybe. Or worse. Intrigued, I pick them up gingerly, like they might bite. It had a Christmas gift tag hanging from it, reading, "The neighbor who played ABBA on repeat." Next, there's a gold wedding ring, heavy, engraved with Forever Denise. This one has tag dangling from it that reads, "Hired by Denise to take care of her abusive, cheating husband." She gave me fresh baked cookies, still warm from the oven, too. The box bulged with trophies, Christmas tags swinging off them like tiny glittery alibis. At the bottom, a mall Santa hat, its white fur trim stiff and crusted with something dark brown. Blood? Hot chocolate? Both? My hand hovers over it, like touching. It might connect me to him, but I jerk back. My heart pounds in my ears. This is insane. This is nuts. This is impressive. Turns out, Dad wasn't just a professional at making kids smile. He was a professional at making people disappear. The thing about secrets is they're sticky. Once you hear one, it clings to you like gum on a shoe, no matter how much you scrape. Dad's confession isn't just sticking, it's metastasizing. The more I think about it, the more I see his life wasn't two separate halves. Santa and hitman, jolly old saint and silent assassin. It's all the same guy. And now, I'm the one holding the bag. He's dead. The town's favorite. Mall. Santa. Gone to that big workshop in the sky. Kids will cry when they hear. Some mom will bring them to the mall next week, hoping to see his stupid, twinkly eyes and hear his gravelly laugh. Instead, they'll get some substitute in a cheap suit, the kind who smells like whiskey and regret. That'll be Dad's legacy. A hole in the lives of every snot-nosed kid who sat on his lap, unless I tell the truth. If I do, it won't be crying kids. No. The whole town will lose its collective mind. Imagine this headline. Breaking news. Killer. Kringle caught dead. The local paper will have a field day. They'll dig up every photo of him, grinning in his red suit, surrounded by smiling children, and slap it next to words like murderer in bold block letters. The tabloids will pick it up. Every dumb podcaster with a microphone will start calling him the Silent Santa Slayer. And me? I'll be the idiot who ruined Christmas for the whole town. The funeral smelled like peppermint and formaldehyde. Someone decided Dad's last ride should look like an after-Christmas clearance aisle. Red and white draped the lid, as if trying to sugarcoat the whole thing. And of course, the mall workers showed up in elf hats, because nothing says, "We respect your dead father," like polyester and jingling bells. The service started with a speech from Jerry, the guy who managed the mall. Jerry had a voice like a dying accordion and the charisma of wet cardboard, but he tried. He wasn't just Santa, Jerry said, his words wobbling. He was Christmas. He saved Christmas. Saved it? Like he pulled Christmas from a burning building? You mean he sat in a chair for 8 hours a day while toddlers screamed in his face? Then came the slideshow. Dad with kids. Dad shaking hands. Dad eating cookies that probably came with handwritten death requests. And now it was my turn. I stepped up to the podium, clutching my notes. My palms were slick, my mouth dry. Every eyeball in the room locked onto me like I was the halftime show. Here lies Santa, the town legend, and here comes his loser kid, fumbling for words. I cleared my throat. Dad was unforgettable, a safe start. Too safe. My hands shook. I glanced down at my notes, then up at the crowd. Their faces blurred. My brain buzzed because, my voice cracked. He was Santa, and a hitman. The room froze. A collective gasp sucked all the air out. Then Jerry laughed. The kind of laugh that makes you wonder if someone's choking. Santa? A hitman? More laughter erupted. Next, you'll tell us Rudolph ran a dip-fighting ring. I blinked. The crowd thought I was joking. Thank God, I faked a chuckle. The kind that burns your throat on the way out. Yeah, I guess he really killed it as Santa, huh? The groans at my pun covered my slip-up, and I pivoted. Hard. But seriously, Dad was the most unforgettable Santa this town ever had. They clapped. Some people wiped tears. And me? I stared at the casket, wondering what was worse, burying the truth with him, or walking around with it, lodged in my head forever. The funeral was barely over when he found me. Grizzled guy in a trench coat. The kind of face that looks like it's been carved out of driftwood. He shook my hand, his grip hard and dry, and said he knew my dad. Frankie, he said, like I should already know who he was. An old associate of your dad's. Associate? What kind of associate? Did Santa have a union? A reindeer mafia? Sorry for your loss, Frankie said, not sounding sorry at all. Your dad was a legend, one of the best in the biz. The biz? I asked, the words tasting like sewer milk. Frankie smirked, like I'd just failed some kind of test. He opened his trench coat, not for a gun, or a bomb, or a flashing incident, but for a business card. The font was a little too cheerful, a little too Comic Sans for what it said. Kringle and Associates. Holiday solutions for your problems. I stared at it like it might bite me. This is a joke, right? Frankie leaned in, breath heavy with something cheap and lethal. Your dad wasn't the only one, he said, his voice like gravel, rolled in honey. He pulled a candy cane from his pocket, twisting it between his fingers. Seasonal work. It's got its advantages. Keeps things clean. He paused, watching me, waiting, like there was something I was supposed to say. It's the perfect cover. Frankie smiled, teeth yellowed like a dog just pissed in the snow. He straightened up, sliding his hands into his coat. Your dad always said you'd make a great Santa. You've got the look. My dad spent my whole life teaching me things I didn't realize were lessons. How to lie with a smile. How to disappear in a crowd. How to keep secrets. I always thought he was preparing me for life, but maybe he was just preparing me for this. Frankie's words hung in the air like cigarette smoke, clinging to my skin. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Frankie tipped an imaginary hat and walked away, disappearing into the kind of fog that makes you doubt he was ever really there. I looked at the card again, the words staring back like a dare. Kringle and Associates. Dad always said to find a job that suits you. But some jobs find you. In the distance, I heard bells, maybe wind chimes, maybe the Salvation Army guy packing up. Who knows? What I do know is that I hate kids. I love cookies, and I could probably pull off the beard. The guinea pigs. Dr. Travers ticked all the boxes on my consent form, and peering over his glasses, assured me an arm transplant was standard practice. I perform 10 a day, he said, handing me the paperwork. They're a piece of cake. Really? For sure, he said, indicating where to sign. It's just brain surgery that gives me a headache. Stella. The anesthetist rolled her eyes, sighed, and asked if I'd any allergies. None, I replied, scanning the small print. That's just perfect, she said, clearing her throat. Would you prefer gas and air, or the full works? What's the norm? I said, catching her eye. That depends. She smiled. Are you squeamish? Chauza. When I signed up for military service 5 years ago, I'd selected the BAGS health insurance option. Biologically Accelerated Growth Systems, or BAGS, for short, was a third-party company pioneering an experimental limb replacement scheme. The government initiated the idea, and the Ministry of Defense embraced the concept to counteract the ongoing threat of IEDs. In the event of a severe injury or amputation, they promised us rapid treatment and substitute limbs. All they required from volunteers were 2 pints of blood and sufficient genetic material to cultivate a trauma clone in their body farm. It made sense, and I had nothing to lose, hopefully. I have to admit that the lure of the extra pay motivated me when I signed the forms. Any potential injuries gained in active combat were far from my mind, and further complications seemed a remote possibility. It was during the 6 months of basic training I discovered no one else had enrolled for the BAGS insurance policy. Perhaps everyone reckoned the scheme was just a gimmick. Maybe I'd misread the caveat on the consent form about transplanting living tissue. I mean, it never occurred to me I'd meet the limb donor face to face. Tutua, my last tour of duty, occurred in April 2015. Around the time jihadist fighters released a video of the ancient city of Nimrud erupting in a cloud of dust and smoke. They attacked its priceless sculptures and frescoes with sledgehammers and power tools, then detonated the 3,000-year-old Assyrian ruins. The wanton demolition came amidst a wave of attacks on Allied forces in Iraq. I lost my left forearm in Nasiriyah, about 360 clicks south-southeast of Baghdad, near the ruins of the ancient city of Ur. Sergeant Albury snagged his boot tip on a tripwire and didn't stand a chance. He was toast in an instant, poor sod. I was next in line, and the landmine's devastating blast threw me across the street. So much for the cradle of civilization. There was little below my left shoulder when I regained consciousness in the field hospital's ICU. The duty surgeon said I was under the knife for 10 hours and told me I was lucky to be alive. He expected a full recovery, having extracted a bucket of the shrapnel from my vital organs, although he expected roving fragments to surface over time. "If you have any further issues," he said, picking his teeth, "I'm sure your regiment's medics will sort you out." Yeah, right, I thought. But you know what? He wasn't wrong. A serious-minded BAGS employee in an expensive suit attended my bedside the following day and explained the benefits of my policy. He presented a convincing case for urgent action and applied for a consultation on my return to base. I waited 6 weeks for an appointment to discuss my suitability for a limb transplant. Dr. Travers was frank. Either he operated forthwith, or I faced an interminable desk job back at HQ and no more active duty. "Are there any risks?" I asked. "The odds of rejection are slim," he said, frowning, "but better than your career prospects as a shorthand typist." "Point taken," I said, considering my disadvantage. Dr. Travers glossed over the matter of sourcing and matching a spare limb. "It's not all about physical compatibility," he said. "There's the psychological aspect to consider." I recall biting my lip when he explained a typical post-op response. "It'll be disconcerting and may feel as if it doesn't belong to you," he said. "However, just remember, an unfamiliar appendage is far better than the alternative." I'd no time to worry about the details because my allotted day in the operating theater happened within 48 hours. I didn't sleep the night before and entered the theater feeling lightheaded, having followed the nil-by-mouth instruction beforehand. Stella performed her last checks before a nurse handed me a surgical gown, and Dr. Travers scrubbed his hands while we waited for the trauma clone. The freezing cold hiatus on my back in the theater, wearing only a starched cotton gown, was the longest hour of my life. I was covered in goosebumps and shivering from a cold sweat when a masked nurse poked a gurney through the theater's swing doors. She appeared without a drum roll or fanfare, as if she was shoving a burdensome shopping trolley out of a supermarket. The nurse halted parallel to my surgical table, kicked down the brakes, and whipped off the thin sheet to reveal my doppelganger's naked body. It was wired up to a cluster of electrical body monitor pads and strapped down to the metal bed with sturdy leather belts. The left arm sported thick red pre-surgery symbols that looked like a gang member's colors and hanged loose and lifeless above the linoleum. He lay motionless beside me, staring past a bloated plasma bag that dangled aloft and fed blood to an intravenous cannula. Dr. Travers raised his arms and cracked his knuckles and nodded at Stella. She wasted no time and administered a heavy dose of propofol. I remember her asking me to count down from 10, but don't recall getting past 7. When I regained consciousness, my body double was still next to me, an exact copy, except now the left arm was missing, and there was a sutured wound below the shoulder. His eyelids were closed and motionless, except for an occasional REM flutter, and his chest rose and fell in even-paced undulations, as if operated by mechanized bellows. On closer inspection, the trauma clone was nothing like me. There were neither scars and stretch marks, nor any signs of life's long-term damage. The left arm I'd received was similar in size and shape to my original. I mean, I thanked God for my replacement, despite needing months of gym work to strengthen it. Yes, size-wise, it was a splendid match, and Dr. Travers had done a remarkable job. It's just that, well, I don't know. I guess I'll miss that barbed wire tattoo circling my forearm, and all my ginger freckles too. My ex-wife used to love those silly brown spots. "Nobody's perfect," she'd say. If only she knew she could see me now. The adoption process takes time, Dr. Travers said during our meeting a week later. You ought to be home soon, and you'll adjust in a few weeks. Will it ever feel like mine? I said, flexing my stiff new fingers. Of course, he said, cleaning his spectacles. Besides, I'm only a phone call away if you need reassurance. Dr. Travers couldn't guarantee the pairing process would work, and I had to be prepared for rejection. He outlined likely symptoms in case the donor's hand didn't marry up with my nervous system. It was a long month in the BAGS Institute while I acclimated to my new limb. I followed the physio's guidelines for recovery and adhered to her plan, exercising as much as possible. The Institute's layout was straightforward. The building supported 8 levels, and most floors contained glass-partitioned offices. As far as I knew, the first floor contained the surgical theater and recovery wards, and the windowless ground floor housed the gym, storage units, and a boiler room. My first floor ward was empty, and I was alone most days, apart from Nurse Winter's morning welfare visits and meal deliveries, and Dr. Travers' weekly progress checks. I seldom encountered any other members of staff on any of the 8 floors, and met nobody in the gym, pool, or sauna facilities. Apart from intermittent security patrols, there were only a couple of employees engaged in gardening and exterior maintenance work. It was on my last day that we had a power cut. and the building lost its heat and lighting. I was exiting the gym at the time, cast into darkness by the occurrence, and strayed down an unfamiliar corridor. It was about 10 minutes before the green overhead emergency lights kicked in, by which time I found myself in one of the storage units. Somehow, I'd bypassed the security system in the outage and found myself lost in a maze of boxes, sealed containers, and cargo bays. I admit being disorientated by the experience. However, a sudden thought occurred. Until that moment, I'd never considered my trauma clone's whereabouts. Where was he? And what condition was he in? Was there accommodation here? Dr. Travers had led me to believe the Institute looked after and supported my trauma clone. So, why had he forbidden me to talk to him or make contact? I was pondering these questions as I meandered down a gentle sloped vehicle access ramp into the basement. As soon as I entered the lower corridors, I heard a low, stuttering hum of clicks and splutters. I thought it was a chattering mechanical turbine spluttering to life. I was wrong. The noise had an organic quality and enveloped me in slow pulses, like surf dissolving between fractured seashells on a distant shore. I stumbled onwards in the pale amber glow until I could advance no further. The light was emanating from translucent ceiling panels within a glass-walled room. Below it stood motionless figures connected to an upper gantry by a complicated loom of feeding tubes and electrical sensor cables. Life support systems, I imagined. The figures all shared similar characteristics, but differed somewhat in musculature, as if they were cuttings taken from a parent and propagated at staggered intervals. They were all naked and standing in equally spaced rows and columns, like life-sized chess pieces, awaiting a call to arms. There were at least 20 of them, all staring ahead with uncomprehending, glazed eyes and indifferent expressions. The wretched creatures were like a herd of cattle grazing in a pasture, oblivious to time and tide, and at the mercy of unknown assailants. I advanced towards the glass wall, and the closest figure's head turned to face me. It was obvious from his missing limb and sutured shoulder that we'd met before. There was a spark of recognition in those dilated pupils, like a dim, flickering light from a dying star. He edged forward as far as his tethers would allow, and raised his right arm in painful increments. All the while, those black pools of artificial existence held their intense, unflinching gaze. His fingertips reached to their full extent, like an unfurling leaf, and stroked the surface of the glass between us. I placed my left hand on the transparent surface and spread my fingers. Without so much as a blink, he mimicked my gesture. Our raised palms mirrored each other, either side of the shatterproof glazing. My hand flinched, as if gripped by its rightful owner, or some vestigial impulse dictated its movement. I hesitated for more than a minute as it twitched and writhed of its own accord. I lowered my eyes, tearing myself from his pitiable stare. 15 millimeters separated us, and yet we were worlds apart, as if we were distant relatives meeting in some parallel universe. I imagined some warmth in his palm, and supposed his instinctive gesture was meant to keep me there. He turned away and returned to his designated position amongst all my other clones. They were all looking at me now. My back spasmed with an intense, muscular shiver, as if I'd felt an icy blast. It was impossible to remain there with all those pairs of eyes judging me. I rubbed my hands together for warmth as I walked away, and I realized my clone wasn't born. He was created. He hadn't emerged from nature. The Institute reared and propagated him from cells which they'd nurtured to a mature specimen. That notion should have consoled me, but it didn't. Dr. Travers was adamant. The trauma clone didn't have a life as such. No family, no memories, and no real concept of a world outside. That was how he told me to frame the situation. "You're lucky," he said. "Not everyone has a chance to replace all their vital organs." I felt sick, looking down at my left arm afterwards, and recalled that awful stump on my doppelganger. Now, I'd encountered him in person. It felt as if I'd been caught red-handed, receiving stolen goods, and by chance met the lawful owner. "Don't worry about it," Dr. Travers said, placating my concerns. I couldn't be at peace with the notion, but I accepted he was right. How else could I live with myself, knowing that the trauma clone's only function was to donate spare parts? There was a guard of honor as I departed that evening, and I wondered what would happen if my trauma clone escaped. Would he survive in the outside world, or just succumb to nature's mercy, like a domesticated pet that's lost its natural instincts? As I walked across the deserted compound to my vehicle, I couldn't imagine returning here unless the worst happened. I supposed I'd only meet my trauma clone again if I was unlucky during my next tour in the Middle East. But who knows? They hadn't patched me up to stare at a PC all day. Stay quiet, friend. Lila sank into the couch, the flickering glow of the TV screen illuminating the shadows that loomed the darkened room. She had chosen a silly rom-com, hoping to distract herself, but the air felt thick, almost suffocating. Every creak of the old house made her jump, and the shadows in the corners seemed to whisper her name in a language she couldn't understand. It was late, and her roommate Clara was working on her thesis upstairs. But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't the only ones in the home. An uneasy tension coiled in her stomach, forcing her to triple-check behind each door, under the couch, and even peered behind the shoe rack, half expecting to find something or someone hiding within. She ducked below the kitchen counters, her fingers feeling for a butcher's knife. Her heart sank when she felt the empty spot in the knife rack. It was missing. The chill creeping up her spine told her that whatever was happening was more than just her imagination. She glanced toward the back door, where the moonlight shimmered through the glass panes, casting eerie reflections that danced on the walls. A sudden gust of wind rattled the bay window, sending a shiver through her. Something was off. With a tentative step, she approached the back door, feeling the cold metal handle beneath her palm. The moment she unlocked it, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sound startled her, and she snatched it up, her pulse quickening at the sight of Clara's name. "Did you hear that?" the message read. A cold dread settled over her, crawling beneath her skin as the unease that had settled over her intensified. What could Clara possibly be hearing? She typed back, "Hear what?" but hesitated, glancing down the hallway that led to the stairs. The dim light from the TV cast erratic shadows that flickered and danced, and for a fleeting moment, Lila thought she saw something move behind the curtains. Her breath hitched, a primal instinct warning her that she was not alone. Maybe it was just the movie messing with her mind, but the feeling of being watched pressed heavier on her chest. Another message chimed in. "I think someone's outside." Panic surged through Lila's veins, prickling her skin. She stood frozen for a moment, weighing her options. Should she check the back door or run upstairs to her roommate? Clara's words echoed in her mind. Why would she think someone was outside? How could she guess that? Why is she being so casual about it? "Are you sure?" Lila typed back, her fingers trembling. "Just stay quiet," Clara replied. "I'll call you when I'm sure." A shiver ran down Lila's spine. Her instincts screamed at her to call the police, but fear held her in place. The silence grew oppressive, and she could hear the faint sound of something dragging from above. Without thinking, she moved to the back door, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. As she reached for the handle, a scream erupted from upstairs, a raw, piercing wail that silenced the night. It was Clara's voice. Adrenaline propelled Lila forward as she bolted toward the staircase, her heart hammering in her chest. "Clara!" she yelled, bounding up the steps 2 at a time. The hallway stretched out before her, dark and foreboding, thick with an air of dread. "Clara!" she shouted again, panic clawing at her throat. The scream had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt like a warning. When she reached Clara's door, her hand trembled as she tried to push it open. It was locked. Why was it locked? Lila fumbled for her spare key, forcing the door open. The room was empty, save for the dim glow of Clara's laptop on the desk. Papers were strewn about, books toppled over, and the window was wide open, allowing a chilling breeze to sweep through the room. Lila stepped inside, her heart racing. "Clara," Lila called softly, her voice just above a whisper. "Where are you?" Suddenly, she heard a soft rustling from the bathroom. Her breath caught, and fear settled like a stone in her stomach as she approached, each step feeling heavier than the last. She reached for the door, her mind racing with images of Clara being attacked. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle, glancing back at the open window that seemed to beckon her to escape. Then her phone buzzed again, illuminating the screen with another message from her roommate. "Don't come in." Lila's heart sank, and a sense of dread washed over her. The message was sent from Clara's phone, but something felt wrong. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rustling from the bathroom stopped abruptly, replaced by a suffocating silence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Lila took a step back, cold sweat prickling her skin. She felt trapped. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave Clara. With trembling hands, she yanked open the bathroom door. Clara stood there, her eyes wide and wild, blood staining her nightgown, the crimson liquid soaking into her hair like a macabre halo. In the bathtub, a body lay motionless, limbs grotesquely scattered like a puzzle, arms and legs discarded beside the sink. The young woman's lifeless eyes stared vacantly at the ceiling, unseeing. Lila could barely make out the limb hanging from Clara's hand, for in the other was a knife, glistening in the remnants of her victim. Lila froze, her mouth dry and her mind reeling. The air thickened with a metallic tang, and she could feel her lungs begging for air. "Clara," her voice cracked, trembling as violently as her body was. "What have you done?" Clara slowly turned her head, a strange, twisted smile creeping across her lips, glistening with the blood that stained her face. "You said you didn't hear anything," she said, her voice cold and deliberate. "You lied." "I didn't," Lila began, only to be cut off. "You lied," Clara repeated, her tone sharp, cutting through the air like the blade in her hand. "You need to stay quiet, friend, and I'll make sure you never lie again." The door behind Lila slammed shut, sealing her inside the suffocating darkness. Fear surged through her as Clara advanced, the knife glinting ominously in the dim light. "Clara, please." Lila's plea faded into a whimper, the weight of impending dread crushing her. Without warning, Clara lunged forward, the blade slicing through the air with a cruel precision. Pain exploded in Lila's mouth, and she gasped, trying to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the metallic taste of blood. As Clara withdrew the knife, Lila felt a sudden emptiness. Her tongue, her voice, her very essence slipped from her mouth and fell to the floor with a sickening thud. Clara's eyes gleamed with a wild delight as she leaned closer, whispering words that curled around Lila's mind like smoke. "Now you'll stay quiet," Clara said, her voice low and dripping with satisfaction. "No more lies, no more noise." The door behind Lila slammed shut, the weight of darkness closing in, silencing her voice and sealing her fate. Renaissance. The view from the first floor bedsit window tonight was dreary. Great drifts of spume hurtled across the road, leaving shallow lakes to creep across the promenade and pour back into the ocean. Richard turned away and sat morosely on the threadbare chair beside the bed, dully regarding the marked and faded wallpaper, the fly-specked single light bulb oscillating gently in the draft from the ill-fitting windows. He turned his attention to the faded and patterned floor covering. If he looked closely, images danced before his eyes. The head of a huge silverback gorilla stared belligerently at him. Elsewhere, gibbons swung elegantly from a treetop. A demon glared at the periphery of his vision. But his favorite of all, which he could discern the most easily, a lissom and naked young woman, leaning invitingly against a doorframe, with raised knee shielding the promise of a hinted pudenda. He tore his eyes away and checked his watch. 5 o'clock. A long time yet. Then the usual Wednesday footsteps pittered along the hallway below, as he had known they would, and splashed down the entrance steps and onto the footpath. He craned his neck and saw the familiar, rain-coated figure, umbrella turned into the wind, pittering along the street, ridiculous high-heeled shoes dancing amongst the puddles. They were red. They always were. He watched the figure until it rounded the corner. Once gone, it was as if it had never existed. Ephemeral, like life itself. The heavy overcast drew the fading light into full darkness sooner than it might have, but much too soon yet. All that could be done was to watch the street lamps down the length of the promenade, floating in their own pools of shifting light, like so many illuminated masts in harbor, their reflected light sending streamers of rain, runneling almost horizontal on the outside of the windows. Richard switched on his own, gently swinging light bulb. Instantly, in the window's reflective depths, the ghost of his sallow face stared blankly back with haunted eyes. He turned off the light, and his ephemeral self blinked out. Another ghost laid to rest, dark. he closed his eyes. Without light, the harsh demarcation of the four corners of the room became infinity. He floated in its comforting, amniotic embrace, attached to the present only by an umbilical whipcord of anxiety. In the end, the pull proved too much, and he was drawn back to harsh reality, like the sudden deliverance of a breech birth hacked into being by the surgeon's knife. He strode across to the window to ease his cramping muscles. The fight, already lost, as he had known it would be, reborn. His night eyes saw the darkness bleeding rivers, shedding blood-thick tears down the outside of the window pane, reflected from the passing car's tail lights and the wildly tossing promenade lights, to pool gelatinous on the windowsill. He imagined he felt a wetness on his hands, a warm and glutinous, congealing wetness. He followed the raindrops across the window with his finger and left on the inside an imaginary, sanguine tracery. He looked at his hands as if for the first time, wondering at their unfamiliarity, their symmetry, their grossness, recognizing their disguised strength beneath the tremor, recognizing also that the unsteadiness was an excitement taken beyond control that shivered its way down the length of his body, a thirst that demanded to be slaked. The night was full dark now. He opened the door and left softly. The outer door swung shut behind him, a sepulchral sound entombing the stillness of the musty hallway. He paused, head hooded against the needling rain, and peered through the sheeting curtains that obscured the view one moment, then swept on the next. The promenade swam with color, a surrealist nightmare of spiraling light and plunging shadow. By comparison, he felt himself a monochrome shade, an empty vessel, drifting powerless in a roaring ocean of color that had no other purpose than to toss him to and fro until his destiny had been fulfilled, and then return him spent to his harbor, bereft, befouled, bedizened, red, blood red, red. The pavement orgasmed with the color. Pools of liquid carmine shimmered at his feet, as fitful as a broken promise, pigmented only by the festooning lights. Once around the corner, away from the promenade's glitter, the pooling rain became dark and wet and cold again, and Richard's head cleared. The madness was at his back now, but his way still lay forward, into the dark. The street in front was empty. Houses on each side, isolated cocoons of brick and light and love. The only sound that of Richard's footsteps measuring their length through the puddles, and the gurgle of rain cascading down the gutters. Richard slipped a hand inside his coat pocket and caressed the slivered blade that nestled there. The ice-keen touch upon his skin raised the hackles of his neck. Waves of anticipation raced down his spine and through his fingers, which spasmed. The stiletto point pricked, and he withdrew his hand to savor the sensation. Blood globbled on his fingertip like a black polyp, and Richard raised it to his eyes in fascination. Then it was dashed away by the rain, which carried it in thin streamers across his hand. He put it to his mouth and sucked, refreshed by the cool wetness of the rain, seasoned with the heavy tang of his own blood. He suckled a moment, then moved on. Like a fading echo, he kept to the shadows, flitting from doorway to doorway, avoiding the ubiquitous, questing cameras with the ease of long familiarity. Narrow alleys drifted by to his left, dark, anonymous canals choked with the jetsam of urban life. He passed these by. An island of brilliance signaled further on, neon lights searing holes in the dark, caking the road with an impasto of color, so thick, so scarlet, so palpable, and yet as insubstantial as breath. Richard's own breath came with slow, measured control, resting so low and soft in his throat that it could have been a purr. He took shelter in a deep shop doorway, transfixed by the neon flicker, and waited. Cars planed by, streaming rubied skeins beneath their wheels. The sound of tires, louder than their engines. In the glow of the neon lights, car doors opened, clunked shut. Voices cried, footsteps splashed, running, pattering up the steps of the cinema, and halted while hands flapped, shook at sodden raincoats, then hurried on into the foyer to be swallowed up, lost to a world as transient as their own. Brief lives. Richard watched and waited, measuring the passing time by the measure of his breath. It beat in time with his pumping heart. Red, 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 red blood red, red blood red. Outgoing picture-goers from the early program began to trickle out, raising umbrellas against the rain, in pairs, in groups, singly. Richard left the shelter of the doorway, heading for the car park. The cinema car park was small and little used, emptying quickly now as the patrons swept homewards to their fires and their families. Richard mingled briefly with the slowing trickle of incoming patrons as he made his way to the rear of the building, with the occasional patron leaving by the convenient rear exit. He edged into a gap between the bulk refuse containers and the boiler housing, and melded into the dark. His position commanded a sweep of the car park entrance on the one hand, and on the other, a view of the few remaining cars. One by one, they cleared as their passengers scampered by his hiding place, family groups squealing against the lashing rain, individuals going their separate ways. Richard's heart pounded with the effort of holding still, of awaiting the moment. And the moment came. A lone figure scampered down the short flight of steps, down from the rear fire exit. Last to leave, as it always was, coat drawn over its head, red shoes pittering their regular Wednesday footsteps, as they had pittered earlier in the evening, silent as shadow. Richard stepped out, staying a startled gasp with a hand cupped across the figure's mouth, and drew it to the shelter of the bins. His fingers clamped hard across its face, whilst terrified eyes stared wildly into his own snake pit pupils. Arms and legs flailed, then stiffened in shock as Richard drew his knife and stilled the working mouth with a single thrust, skewering the blade into the palate through the base of the jaw. Lips grimaced in pain. Eyes squeezed tight shut against the nightmare, chest heaving with a locked-in scream. Blood welled in the mouth, down the nose, trickled, flowed, torrented. The slick, sensuous feel caressed Richard's fingers as it channeled down the blade. At its touch, he jerked the blade free, the jaw gagging slack, and drove it between the breasts and up, working it inward, twisting, grating. Rich, dark blood bubbled, gouted from the gaping mouth, spouted with air expelled from the riven lungs. He withdrew the blade and stared at questing eyes that glazed over as he watched, supporting the body that slumped in his grasp, and as the head lolled, let the woman drop like a discarded rag. Richard stood over the huddled heap, spent, supporting himself on the wall, watching with lackluster eyes the dark pool spreading from the placental evisceration of the torn body. The rain lapped at the edges, washing it away in rivulets. He stepped out into the car park and walked quietly away, head bowed against the rain, in common with the other few pedestrians hurrying home for shelter. As though in expiation, the rain lashed down even harder, washing the body clean, rinsing the blood into the gutters. Richard pulled his hood down across his tormented eyes, then hunched his shoulders against the torrent. Behind him, the faint sound of laughter mocked from within the cinema. He let the laughter wash over him dully and raised his face to the sky, mingling its tears with his own. The glistening street arrowed back to the seafront, a dark, lonely fairway to a hopeless harbor, leaving death behind. Leaching into the rain, he drew a shuddering breath and took a first, hesitant step home, reborn once more to a hopeless, pointless life, until the next dead, red rain time. And on the vinyl floor, the demon leered, "Take me. I I no longer wanted to live my life, but neither did I wish to die. So I resisted the temptation of the eternal abyss, knowing that any afterlife would hold no consolation. In effect, choosing a living death, achieved by numbing my senses against the world and disappearing within. By day, it was books, movies, video games, anything to place my mind in the body of another, transporting my consciousness to a plane where there were strict rules, and the main character always triumphed, as opposed the uncertainty of my own existence. Rarely did I surface from fantasy, and only when my body demanded it absolutely necessary. The sun never graced my flesh, and the air of my sealed chamber weighed heavy with my own musk. I was a fully grown woman, living as a teenage boy, and I didn't care. By night, it was a chemical affair. Amber spirit of any form or flavor would achieve my goal, as long as it was served with ice in its heart. Taste was a luxury I could ill afford, not after losing my career to sheer apathy. It no longer seemed of any import whether digital numbers fell in line with invented targets. The whole world operated on an imaginary system of credit that existed only because we said it did. Anything outside of a practical vocation for which I no longer had time or patience to learn felt like playing pretend and a waste of life. My usual haunt was a quiet dive bar at the end of my city block. Its proximity, the only deciding factor, limiting the expedition home to a straight line stumble. That night, I spent as any other, nursing a tumbler and examining the slow melt of the frozen shards it protected. "Time for one last round, sweetheart?" Frank asked, ducking his head into my line of sight. He was a kind soul. Despite the tattoo-covered biceps, large enough to toss me out like a rag doll, he always let me brood in peace. Watching my back and moving on any would-be suitors, the apparent ruffian doted on me with a brotherly worry. He never denied my cash, though. While busy at weekends, the quiet, dead-end joint couldn't afford to turn away drunks the rest of its working days. I felt at times to be single-handedly paying the poor guy's wage. "Always," I answered, offering up my low-tide glass and a half-hearted smile. As he poured, I glanced across the room. There were a few men in suits, clearly avoiding their homes and wives. A couple of tourists just looking for a warm place to rest, and a scattering of solitary older women. They, like me, I assumed, had nowhere else to go, no one to return to, and nothing to live for, aside from the never-ending goal of forgetting. I'd had it all. Not so long ago, I had been lucky enough to know love and comfort. However, my good fortune was stolen away by one solitary word: printed in black ink on a medical chart. That word had ripped my future away and burned it to ash for good measure, leaving me here in my perpetual endeavor to avoid my own existence. Holed up at the corner booth, he was there, as always, my constant, silent drinking buddy. Every night he arrived like clockwork in a pressed black shirt and pants with shining black boots. His midnight wardrobe offset only by the pale ivory of his skin and the crimson of his lips. Ordering a single jar of bourbon, which would never grace his tongue, there he stoically remained, silently surveying the room. I had never even seen him rise to use the bathroom. How he managed to leave several times a week with a different conquest on his arm, I had no idea. Girl or guy, it didn't seem to matter to him. They just flocked to his side, like magnets being drawn together. With only a look, he seemed to seduce a target with an hour or less of minimal effort. He then escorted them out the door for what I only assumed to be a night of intense pleasure. He was certainly handsome, in a clean-cut way, but he had never directed his gaze at me or any of the other regulars. It was always the passing through that succumbed. Alaric was his name, according to Frank. In spite of his blatant philandering, I couldn't help but imagine he treated his prey with more humanity that I had been dealt by the man I once loved. That cursed filth had proclaimed to love me. The putrid liar had promised me protection. The venomous snake had abandoned me at my most vulnerable. One word was all it took to break our bond, shatter his oath completely. One printed word, voiced in clinical monotone under fluorescent lights. The word that tore my future to shreds and sent my beloved in search of a more suitable mate, infertile. I had been told I was still grieving, and knew it to be true. My depression, spiced with anger, told a traditional tale. What I considered a lie was that it would end in an accepted peace. How could it, when my natural immortality had been ripped away? Any harmony I would have found in life would have risen from knowing my memory, and soul would have persisted through the generations that came after me. Anecdotes told of my character to grandchildren and onward, keeping me alive in thought, my name on a branch of an ever-expanding tree. Instead, there would be no furthering of my story. It would end when I did. So why not just get it over with? Any experiences gained would be lost to time anyway. So why bother? Why expend all that energy on impermanence? I should have just ended the torment that day, when my forehead had been stamped with pointless. There were only two reasons I held back from instigating the end. One was the fear that any afterlife would be purposed with watching over loved ones, for which I had none. so it would tally that I would be no better off than I was now. The other was Alaric, and the solution I had begun to suspect he could offer me. My quest to lose myself in various media had educated me thoroughly in the ways of the vampire, the desperate young girl in need of connection, an outcast from the society surrounding her. Ill-fitting in the living world, she would always come across a creature of the night who would welcome her into his ranks, usually with sultry and salacious single-mindedness. Alas, if Alaric was what I suspected him to be, he ignored me, perhaps because my clouded mind was reaching for a fantasy solution to a real-life problem. Most likely, he was only a strange-looking man with a talent for seduction. Regardless, I couldn't shake the idea. Too many aspects of his regular attendance pointed to the supernatural. If I was wrong, all I would achieve was appearing like the drunk I had become, which was small consequence to risk being proven right. "Good evening, Alaric," I slurred, and slid onto the red velvet bench beside him. "Do I know you?" he asked in a soft English accent. His slow and steady speech belayed a calm in direct contrast to my harsh American. "Not officially, but I've sat at that bar every night for several weeks, watching you, so I believe I know you very well." "Oh?" he asked, waiting for me to fill the space. "I know what you are," I whispered, in the way that inebriated people do when they believe themselves subtle. "And what is that?" he said, smiling as if humoring a toddler. The feeling of being infantilized by a look sent waves of submission through me. It made me feel safe under his powerful gaze, willing to surrender control into his adept hands. Returning to a childlike state would allow me to release the expectations I had placed on myself to assume parenthood, which only solidified my resolve to follow my intended course of action. "Vampire," I blurted. I did not want to drag this out into a feature film of suspect and intrigue. I wanted my answer and solution that night. The sooner, the better. His reaction was as expected, a hearty laugh, but one that did not convince his eyes that my accusation was truly funny. "Does such a thing exist?" he asked of me. "I did not believe so until I happened upon you. I see you taking victims, always transients, who never return. You never drink, never eat, never use the bathroom. You are pale, intense, clothed in black, and I have only ever seen you at night. Perhaps I am simply peculiar," he offered. "Perhaps." I nodded. "I think it worth looking the fool to discover the truth." He responded, never breaking his eye contact, his intense stare examining every facet of me via the portal of my irises. It felt as though he flayed me from the outside until his scrutiny fell upon my vulnerable soul. I now understood how he seduced so many, so quickly. "I wish you to turn me," I said, interrupting his gaze before I fell completely at his feet. My life has lost all meaning with the living, and I would greet death but for the fear of further loneliness. I see a single solution for one who would not live, but does not wish to die. So please, take me with you into immortality. Follow me, he said, and rose, striding to the doors, without looking back to see if I followed. He must have been as certain as I was that I would. Ignoring a disapproving look from Frank, I made my way across the room to the exit. I pursued my immediate master out of the bar and through dark alleys that all smelled of refuse and rats. Stumbling to remain on his heels, I signaled my deference like a dog called to attend. He stopped suddenly, turning and reaching a strong arm around my waist, and in one motion, pressing me against the scorched wall of a building. Dumpsters, boxes, and crates now blocked my view of anything but him. "You would submit to your impulse?" he asked, his lips pressed to my ear and his hand against my chest, pinning me in place against the cold bricks. I could feel his heavy breaths quickening in lust, his hand quivering where it rested between my breasts. Whether it was from desire for my blood or body, I still did not know. The chance of stretching my living death into infinity was worth giving him either. "You would succumb to my will?" he asked again. "Break from this life and join me in whatever comes next?" "Yes!" I screamed in ecstasy, feeling excitement and promise for the first time since that word had plunged me into darkness. "Take me, please. Take me away from this temporary world." Sudden pain and cold followed, his dead cheeks pressing against my neck and his teeth puncturing my jugular. My warm blood mixed with his icy touch, like boiling soup spilt on a snowy mountain. I closed my eyes and writhed in anticipation of the immortality I sought. Eventually, he pulled back. The world swam and swirled as my head felt as but a feather. I saw his chin stained brown with my dried blood. How long had I given myself to this creature? The low light of the alley weighed down on my senses. The rotten smell of the trash bags assaulted, and without his hard body pressed against mine, I felt exposed. Will it happen now?" I managed to mutter through the disorientation, my eyes rolling and unable to focus on his beautiful face. "Will you die? Yes? Will you turn?" "I doubt it," he said, sneering down at me. Somehow he had grown tall, or I had fallen. I did not know which was more real. "I am a predator, not some romanticized, dangerous lover to be tamed, as this age loves to depict. You are nothing but prey. I have no desire to intentionally turn game, as I am sure you would not share your bed with a cow. He spun on his heels and stalked into the night, with no further words or explanation. I was alone, crumpled amongst the filth, dying in the dark. I had not the energy to fear, only regret the trust I had placed in a monster I had not understood. As my eyelids grew heavier and the cold seeped deeper, I began to long for those temporary years, the moments I was so willing to throw away, for all the time I could have had for myself, the experiences I could have taken as my own without concern of their lasting, for the lives I could have affected, but now never would. Perhaps the next plane would offer more than I had imagined. I did not intend to waste the chance again, if it did. I closed my eyes and waited for whatever would come next, accepting in peace that I had ushered in my own end by ungratefully reaching for more than I had been gifted. Returning Marie. Now, before I say anything else, I just need to establish that I am not mad. I have every reason to be mad, but I'm not. I'm not mad. I've never been less mad than I am right now, even though I have every reason to be madder than I've ever been in my life. To the best of my recollection, you were not working here when I came in on Sunday. I'm sure I would remember somebody with as many piercings as you, especially with you being such a young lady and all. I'm sure I would have made some sort of comment about how you don't have a wedding ring on your finger. And that's probably due to all those cartoons you've chosen to imprint upon yourself. No. When I came in here on Sunday, there was a rather old man working behind the counter. I told him I was looking for a rug because my mother-in-law is coming to town, and whenever she comes over, she expects me to put out all the gifts she's gotten me over the years. 18 years of marriage, and she expects to see everything she's ever bought as though my home is some sort of Daphne Rubite Museum. That's her name. Daphne Rubite. She tells me it's Latin, but who knows? The woman lies about everything. Why should her name be any different? Anyway, she got me a rug for Christmas last year, and it was so hideous that I kept it outside in the shed. But when I sent my husband, Griff, to go fetch it so we could display the awful thing, he said, it appeared somebody had broken into the shed and stolen it. Do you believe that? Somebody actually wanted that disgusting rug so much they committed a crime in order to have it. Not that there's much in that shed worth anything, but even the bags of dirt would have been a better choice. My word, I came in here on Sunday because I was looking for a rug that appeared similar to the ugly rug that was stolen. But despite this, allegedly, being an antique store, you do not sell rugs here. I believe I filed a formal complaint in that little suggestion box you have at the front, but I haven't heard any response yet. We can circle back to that later. When I expressed my disappointment to the old man working here at the counter, he offered to give me a discount on what he described as a rather interesting mirror. He went into the back of the store and came back with the item. I found it to be a bit too ornate for my taste. It was imitation gold, and the glass had several scratches on it. I told the old man that a discount would not suffice for a damaged object, but that I would accept it as a gift from the store, since I found it so unprofessional of him not to offer unattractive rugs. He took a moment, looked at the mirror, and then agreed to give it to me, gratis. The old man did not put up much of a fight, and I suppose I should have taken that as a sign that something was amiss. When I got the mirror home, I had absolutely no desire to ever look at it again. The only reason I took it was because I never turned down a deal, and there is no better deal than free. I decided to deposit it in my daughter's room. Riva is 15, and as such, she believes she has impeccable taste, when, in fact, she has no taste whatsoever. She was quite stunned when I showed her the mirror. It's unusual for me to give her gifts, even on her birthday, when I usually donate money to a charity in her name. She took to the mirror immediately, and Griff did his best to hang it in her room, without putting holes in every wall. Finally, he managed to erect it by her closet, and then we all went about our day in preparation for the arrival of Queen Daphne. Almost immediately, things began to go wrong. I noticed that suddenly all the photographs around the house had been altered. I had no idea how it was happening, but the heads of everyone in the photos were gone. Simply gone. I thought it might be some sort of prank, but neither my husband nor my daughter are all that funny. When I mentioned the occurrence at dinner that night, Riva confessed to me that she believed her mirror was haunted. Not just haunted, mind you, but haunted by the ghost of Marie Antoinette. I would have chalked the whole thing up to a teenager's imagination. But my daughter is the least imaginative person you've ever met in your life. Deciding to investigate myself, I marched straight up to her room and planted myself in front of that mirror. Sure enough, after only a moment or two, there she was, Reine de France, herself. She had her head, but there was a minor scar around her neck, and she was holding the most adorable little dog. My French is spotty, since I haven't spoken it since college, when I spent a semester abroad in Paris, smoking cigarettes and ordering hamburgers at French cafes. I managed to work out that the mirror given to me was once owned by Marie's great-great-granddaughter, and she had taken up residence in it since she found heaven to be rather dull. She was the one who changed all the photos, and she said she planned on committing even more mischief for as long as she was in my house, unless I donated her to a museum where she belonged. Well, if that stuck-up monarch thought I was going to relinquish my own property simply to avoid a little poltergeisting, she was sadly mistaken. I told Marie that she was now a guest in my home and would act accordingly, or I would see to it that her mirror was placed in the shed where some petty thieves might abscond with it, the same way they had with the revolting rug my mother-in-law had purchased for me. I was so invested in intimidating a dead Frenchwoman that I didn't even hear the front door open. Daphne had entered our house without knocking, shocker, and came right upstairs to greet Riva, because her granddaughter is the only person she actually cares to see. She arrived just in time to hear me relay to Marie the story of the stolen rug, and she was none too pleased. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, holding the most vile candelabra I've ever laid my eyes on. "Well," she huffed, "would you care to throw this in the shed as well?" Truth be told, that's exactly what I wanted to do with it. Over the next few days, I couldn't tell you who irritated me more, my mother-in-law or the ghost of Marie Antoinette. While Daphne did her standard passive-aggressive commentary on everything from my fashion choices. A woman your age wearing skirts? How brave. To how I raise my child. Would one birthday gift a year really be that bad? Marie preferred to be a bit more whimsical in her torment. The house was constantly filled with smoke, for no reason at all. It wasn't until I located the source of the smoke that I realized our oven was on high and there was a cake burning inside of it. It might be true that she never actually uttered the phrase about letting servants have their pastry, but that's no reason to waste perfectly good food. I have no idea how she even put the cakes together in the first place, since we normally order takeout and keep absolutely nothing in our pantries. Another tidbit Daphne likes to use against me when she visits. "No sugar," she'll squawk. What kind of a household has no sugar? A skinny household. That's what I feel like saying, but I never do. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought the two of them were conspiring against me in my own home. Daphne blamed Marie when all my skincare products were suddenly smeared all over the bathroom walls. But I can't believe anyone that rich would willfully waste La Mer. Marie was definitely responsible for what was going on with Riva, however. My daughter suddenly began acting out. She was shouting about bourgeoisie and escargot and something about a pot de chambre. It took me a day or so, but then I understood that Marie was trying to possess the girl in order to have an even more effective way of terrorizing everyone in the household. Griff was no help at all during all of this, by the way. He loves the History Channel, so for him, This was all wildly entertaining. It wasn't until Riva began taking 5 baths a day and demanding that I feed her bonbons that I decided enough was enough. My plan was to take the mirror out to the shed and smash it into 1,000 pieces. But I remember seeing an old horror film where destroying the haunted item caused the specter to permanently embed itself in the home. The last thing I needed was my daughter walking around like royalty until leaving for whatever community college we'd be sending her off to. I waited until earlier today, when Daphne and Riva were sitting on the couch with a cheese plate watching Les Miserables. And then I tore up to Riva's room and grabbed the mirror. I had to be careful coming down the stairs with it. But luckily for me, they were engrossed in the scene where the revolutionaries were being slaughtered. "Brilliant," I heard Marie exclaim in French. "I just love a good comedy." Somehow, all by myself, I managed to get this ghastly mirror into my car and drive it all the way back here. Now, I would like to return it. I would like an apology. I would like 3 free items from this store, all of which I will be choosing. I would also like an assurance that the old man who gave me the mirror is fired. What do you mean you don't have any old man working here? He was very distinct looking. He had bifocals, salt and pepper hair, and his left ear was a bit lower than his right. Surely you must know him, the owner, all right? Fine. So he's the owner. I still want him fired. What's that? When? 10 years ago? And how? A car accident? My. Well, that's what I get for not asking for a receipt. Doppel by Sean Glenn. Douglas Packard. Why is it that when we stare into terror, we often stare into our own eyes? I think it's the way we're wired. It's our thoughts. We have access to them, but nobody else. And just as it is impossible for foreign hands to unscrew our craniums and peer inside, so too do the minds of others remain unknowable to us. We're alarmed at minds different from our own. We fear those that could be similar, because we don't have to imagine. We know the demons that surge even through normal brains, bat wings and saber fangs next to the little voice that says we should give Grandma a call and then rake the leaves. There's a man in the upper right-hand corner of the mirror. His eyes are my own. Doom. It shudders through me. But how could that be? Russet leaves swirl down from above. They dance in the copper mid-autumn light. It's Saturday at the farmer's market. Children dashing gleefully through cool grass. Fathers in pursuit. Toddlers clamoring at their mothers for another bite of sugary muffin. Cream cheese frosting from the last one, dolloped on the tip of their nose. Peruvian coffee and cheddar frittatas in the air. Fall bounty everywhere. Squash and sweet potatoes, and kale, carrots, beets, and pumpkins. So why does it feel like eternity on the chopping block? And where did my doppel go? He was just there, with me in the